Welcome everyone. Welcome. Welcome everyone who's joining us for the launch of Ecosystem, which we've had at Slug Disco Studios for the past few years. Thank you for joining us. So I'm here like when we did the Horticulous stream a couple of months back. I'm here to just introduce and to be the technical person. I'm hosting the stream. So we are here obviously to launch Ecosystem into 1.0. So I'm going to pass over to Heyman, who is going to run the stream, and Heyman will introduce Tom, the developer of Ecosystem, and then we'll have a chat, and then later on the game will launch from early access to full release. Wonderful. So, fellas, how are we?
All right, thanks, Mike. I'm Heyman, product marketing manager of a bunch of published games of Slug Disco. So I basically take care of a bunch of media content creation and also running the social media of Ecosystem. And here we are having a little bit of a launch stream for Ecosystem, where we're very honored to have Tom here with us to talk about his wonderful game of evolution simulation of Ecosystem. Tom, would you like to introduce yourself and also Ecosystem as a game for viewers who might be new to the title?
Sure. So I'm Tom Johnson. I'm the developer of Ecosystem, and Ecosystem is sort of like it's in the style of like a software toy style of game, like a classic SimCity kind of game, except that you're playing with evolution instead of building a city. And so at the heart of Ecosystem are these evolving virtual life forms. And each one is built from DNA, which specifies sort of everything about them: the structure of their bodies, the structure of their brain, the structure of their skin. And the idea is that you sort of throw a bunch of these creatures with random brains and bodies into the water, and they just sort of flail around for the most part. But some of them, just by chance, manage to move a little bit, and they get to have more offspring than all the ones that didn't. And then after maybe 10 generations or so, you have something that can actually swim. And so the idea is you take all of these different species and you put them together in a shared environment where they swim and graze and prey on each other and socialize and play. And so it's like you're sort of cultivating this world of creatures that is unique just to you.
Yeah, Ecosystem is finally getting into the 1.0 full release after years in early access, and ever since the early access launch, there's been a lot of new features. 12 major updates covering plants, terrain, evolution, and other features, right? So let's talk about the more recent ones. Last year we have the combat update, which allows animals to evolve and attack each other for their own survival and even engage in an arms race with combat features like venoms and spikes, forming complete food chains in those environments. Foragers hunted by predators, predators hunted by apex predators, really raising the stakes of survival. And then earlier this year, we introduced additional autonomy to animals and possibilities to pick up new behaviors like bioluminescence, vocalization, and schooling. Really fleshing out the animals here, actually. Seeing them interact with each other really reminds me of all the National Geographic and BBC documentaries I've seen.
Yeah,
Are those inspirations of the game?
Yeah, very much so. They're always so intense, and also like an Ecosystem. If you see a case where a predator is chasing after a prey, and you have this sort of cute little prey animal that's trying to get away, and the thing is, like in fiction, you always have some sort of idea because of the structure of fiction how it's going to end, But in a nature documentary and in Ecosystem, you don't actually know whether or not the prey is going to get away or whether the predator is just going to eat it. And I've always appreciated that aspect of it, I suppose. And in nature documentaries, there's a genuine sense of tension.
I think before we go on to the next part, Tom, do you want to boot up your game, and then Tom's just going to be playing in the background? Let me know when you've gone over to your game source.
All right.
Fantastic.
I believe I should be ready now.
Okay.
Very nice. Now, The 1.0 update is incoming, so we
go.
are getting some new content for the game as well, and we have a whole new creature type for ecosystem. As a result, the crustaceans, their models' habitats are quite different from the other fish species previously introduced to the game. Tom, do you mind telling us more about the crustaceans and what comes with them in 1.0?
Yeah, sure.
So loading into the map, yeah.
Yeah, so here we're just at the initial phase. I'm just sort of trying out a couple of different random trains until I sort of see one that kind of suits my fancy. I think this one looks good, so I'll go ahead and start here. But the crustaceans, so they're a huge change as far as ecosystem is concerned from everything else that we've seen so far in the game. And the reason for that is that so in ecosystem, one of the big concepts is that function drives form. So the way that the creatures actually look, the way that the fish actually develop is based around the physics of swimming. So because the creatures move with physics, that physics, like the most efficient ways, the most efficient body types for swimming are how the creatures will end up looking. And so crustaceans have a totally different, way of locomotion that the fish, don't have. And so it was in a lot of ways, an entirely new problem to solve, to have something that can walk around on the ground. And in fact, walking is a lot harder than swimming, in a sense. It's easy to sort of accidentally swim, but it's a bit harder to accidentally crawl. But for that reason, I think it also sometimes is more satisfying to watch. In some ways, the crustaceans feel a little more relatable, I guess, than the fish sometimes, because you can watch them actually struggle to get around. And they are very dependent on the environment in ways that I think are pretty interesting. Like if you actually create an environment that's perfectly flat, like an exact flat plane, you will actually get totally different types of crustaceans and oftentimes much faster ones than you'll get if you need sort of crustaceans that are a little bit more suited to all-terrain types, where they need to be able to climb up hills and go over obstacles and stuff like that. And they even need to be able to think a little bit differently, because for a fish, if you can see some food somewhere, you can swim over to it. But for a crustacean, that may not be the case. If it's on the other side of a ravine, then you can't just walk off the edge of a cliff to get it. So there are a lot of aspects that are different about crustaceans, and there are different ways of sort of handling them. So I think for that reason, it's very exciting. It almost in some ways feels like you've doubled the game in a way.
Sounds like the crustaceans are indeed a very complex, sophisticated life form. Basically, like, I think there's a joke about how crustaceans are the end form of every kind of creature simulation.
Oh, yeah,
so we are in the final form of the ultimate life form now.
I believe the process is called carcinization.
Yeah.
Mike, you've played Ecosystem in its early development. From a player's perspective, what strikes you as the biggest change to the game over these years?
Well, I looked after Ecosystem, in the early days that we had it, and I was blown away by, just the different forms that can, appear over time, and how good eventually they get at what they do. But the biggest change, I think, came with the combat update. I think that kind of the change for the feel of the game, like, it adds quite a lot more. What's the word I'm looking for? It adds quite a lot more excitement to it. I mean, it's Ecosystem is a relaxing game. It's slow paced. It's it's serene. It's beautiful. But adding in the natural world as well. That's often how we think of. I mean, we've all seen videos of coral reefs on BBC Nature documentaries, but underpinning all of the wonderful life forms that you see on those documentaries is constant struggle and conflict, and adding that to Ecosystem, I think, really took it up a notch. I think is the answer to that question.
Yeah, I was really happy with how that turned out, because it was very, when I eventually sort of settled on with something that fit in very well with how the game sort of already works. because the combat is very like physics-based, just like the sort of the whole game. The creatures are sort of physics-based. They move with physics, they swim with physics, they walk with physics, and they also like fight with physics. So when they do damage to each other, it is really based on the momentum of a hit or the momentum of a bite. And I think that sort of also allows there to be sort of more interesting things for evolution as an algorithm to sort of work with. Like there's a lot of the fights feel, I think, very different for that reason. Like they're never the same, just like the creature ways of swimming are often not the same.
Yeah, the combat adds a lot more excitement to the gameplay as well. But I feel like it adds a lot more stake in the survival and just makes the interaction between the species a lot more interesting than just like everyone staring at each other, right? But now they are actually competitors that tries to maybe drive each other to extinction or just try to compete for more space and resources. And yeah, Tom, you seem to have a very colorful world all set up down in the bottom of the seafloor. Would you like to give us a quick tour about the plants, terrain, creatures all over the world?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So there's several different ways that you can kind of interact with the world in ecosystem and sort of mold it so that it's your world. The sort of core thought is that you're building an environment with all these different niches in it, and then the creatures adapt to fit all the different niches that are in the world that you've created. And so the first thing you can do is to shape the terrain. And there's a lot of different ways that terrain can affect the world. You can make any kind of terrain you want, so you can try to make like a beach or a lake or a reef or caves or trenches or like more alien landscapes. And the terrain will sort of has a marked effect on things. When we open up this, so I just opened up the terraform tool, and that allows you to make sort of like broad scale changes. So like, for example, if I wanted to kind of carve out like a little valley here, we can do that actually like pretty quickly. And then we have a nice little area here. And so like the fact that there's less light down in this area, and there's like will have a marked effect. I mean, on the crustaceans, obviously this is like a impassable chasm, so they'll stay on one side or the other. But even creatures, you'll see like a different kind of approach to creatures that live down here in the dark will look different and act different than creatures who live, for example, more over here where it's very verdant and green and a little bit sunny. And so just like we made caverns, we can also make a mountain if we want to. So I'll just sort of scroll up here and we can kind of quickly make a little mountain range. And then if you want to make like sort of smaller changes, like if you wanted to just build a structure, you can sort of make little pillars and there's some really interesting things that I've seen people make. Some of my favorites, people essentially made like what almost look like giant like skeletons of sort of prehistoric, creatures that are bigger than have ever existed, on Earth, and use that as like the sort of basis for their ecosystem, almost as though it was like a whale fall in the deep sea.
Yeah, I've seen some that wouldn't be out of place in a FromSoft game.
Yeah, very much so. And one other thing which we can kind of see here is that there's also a fluid sim in the game. So what that affects is, but like when I'll talk about this a little bit more in detail later. But when plants release seeds, when fish lay eggs, all of those things can be blown around by the current, and the current will flow around the environment that you've created, and we can kind of see that here. And you can also sort of draw and shape the current yourself if you want to. So like I can kind of make. We can kind of see it here where it actually goes around this pillar that we've created. It's a little bit chaotic here, so you can kind of see there's some chaotic swirls that are happening.
I think if I remember correctly, the terrain affects a lot of the growth of the plants as well, I assume. So
yeah.
Specifically, currents are for planktons, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, so they affect plankton a lot, and then the other way that they affect it is so each plant. So even though the heart of the game is the creatures, there's a pretty substantial plant simulation that works also. So each plant species, we can kind of see. I've unlocked quite a few here already with hydrilla and Amazon sword plant, and so these are all sort of like aquatic plants that you might even have in a aquarium if you are into that kind of thing. And so they each have their own preferences for what kinds of soil they like and how much sun they like and things like that. And the way the game models plants is each one is like a little replicator. We can kind of see, sometimes I'll see if I can catch one. It might have been more obvious when I started, but you can gradually see sort of each plant when it's on occasion will shoot out a bunch of seeds. So each plant is kind of modeled like a little replicator, and they have their own life cycles, and they age, and they have their own concept of health. And so the idea is basically each plant, just like the fish, the plants are also sort of competing over resources. They're also spreading. And there's this sort of concept of the overall ecosystem health. And so each plant sort of needs a certain amount of ecosystem health to grow somewhere, which kind of in some ways models secession, ecological secession. And so, but sort of like the core idea is that, and the sort of game aspect of it is that your ecosystem health will generally be higher in areas with greater biodiversity, of course. But each plant sort of on its own is always trying to replicate as much as it can. So there's like a sort of chaotic system where each plant kind of in a way wants to take over everything, and will if it could. But that they also sort of, because all of the others are also acting at the same time, so you can eventually set it up so you have a nice stable self-reinforcing system, or one that's always changing but still remains, healthy, basically.
And how does this ecosystem health affect other organisms? Like, does it mean that the higher the health is, the more complex life forms it can support in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so when you spawn in creatures, so we've only got the first level right now, we just have foragers, and they require 10 ecosystem health to spawn in. And they'll actually also, they require 15, and they'll give us back extra ecosystem health on top of that. So if we spawn this in here, oops, so there's already one growing there, I'll just move this a little bit. As we spawn this in, so it's still high enough in this area here that we can spawn in a species next to it. So that species will also improve the ecosystem health. But later on when we unlock, for example, predators, and you can eventually get things like whales and eels and octopuses, and finally crustaceans. And each of those will require a little bit more ecosystem health to set it up, and you'll sort of want a system like that as well. Like so, just like in real life, there's kind of a bit of a structure where you want to have a ton of plants and a lot of foragers and some predators and a few apex predators, because each one sort of needs the higher caloric content from the trophic layer below it.
So essentially, those different creatures will be forming kind of like a food chain.
Exactly.
One feeding on the other one, right?
Yeah.
And looks like you only have a forager unlocked so far. Perhaps we can get a predator on the field if we can get into the creature editor.
Yeah, sure. So I believe I can't skip it, but I could unlock them right now via console command, just so that we can sort of jump ahead a little bit.
Oh yeah, dev cheat it completely, 100%.
Okay, absolutely. All right, so now we've got in, so what I might do is I will maybe quickly spawn in one more species of, well, no, I think it should be okay. So, did you want to try in the editor? Is that what you'd like to see?
Yeah, that would be great to show everyone how to actually create a creature from scratch.
Yeah, that sounds
just have a showcase
good.
of the editor.
All right, so this is the editor. When you create it, it pops up a little sort of simple fish. So you can actually just cycle through random creatures if that's what you want to see. But I will sort of show first how to actually build one from scratch. Now, I'm not as good as some of the best people. We wanted a predator, so I'll set that here. There's also several different. So we have predators, foragers, and apex predators. so there's different types of heads, for example, and they can be more fitting for some types of bodies versus others, and different skin types and things like that. So, and later on, I can also show you crustaceans, because they, of course, will have their own head formats and things like that. So I've set it here to be a predator, and so I'll also give it a sort of a nice predator face. What I often like to go for is, I think that looks like a good kind of predator face here. So I'm not as good at this as some of the players are, but I thought I might go for a nice plesiosaur. So actually, maybe I will go, let's see, I'll give it a little head part here. And a nice long neck. And then, so you basically you add a part like so. And we can kind of stretch it out, give it a big, chunky body. And then I'll just give it a couple of paddles so it can actually move a bit.
At one point, there was a bit of a trend of trying to make human beings for some reason.
Yeah, I remember that. And I think Liam actually made a really excellent catfish that looked like a cat.
He did.
And I believe we got it swimming with its legs, actually paddling the way that a cat, I think, actually would. So let's see, I'll just give this some nice nice flippers so that it has maybe a bit more of a tail fin.
Oh, Tom, since we are on the topic of predators and prey, we just have a question by Larton in the chat, asking how combat would work for prey, whether combat would be more balanced for the prey. When combat starts, they're locked into combat, even if they should run or get tag teamed. But how would the combat work for a prey? Like, for example, how do they interact with predators? What kind of options do they have? Can they fight back, or can they escape from combat?
Right. So for the most part now, there's basically sort of when prey are attacked, they usually tend to fight back. So if they're in the current version of the build in 1.0, immature creatures will just try to flee. They'll just keep going. And mature creatures, once they're old enough and are capable of fighting, will always attempt to fight back. That does sort of put them at a bit of a disadvantage, because in real nature, you would want to, have an actual fight or flight response. And part of the tricky thing of that is, because of the way the game was developed in the earliest versions of it, there were actually predators and apex predators, but they basically just played like essentially tag. So if they could touch a prey animal, then it would die. And so part of the change was to ensure that predators would have that it wouldn't be too hard on predators. So if prey are really good at getting away, then in particular from that state, if the prey are suddenly really good at getting away or much better at fighting, then suddenly everybody's ecosystem crashes because the predators weren't evolved for that. So right now there is a tendency for prey to always fight back, which also tends to mean that there's still a pretty strong advantage for getting away, because usually they'll get away until they are attacked. But there is a noted tendency for creatures to sort of gang up a little bit, especially for the predators. They don't necessarily always try to do that, but it works out that way. However, I've generally found that that often tends to work out best for the ecosystem overall. The predators, despite that, don't actually manage to wipe out the prey, and for that reason, I've sort of kept it in that balance. It's very easy to get into a mode where, and when I first started developing with prey and predators, it was very easy to get into a state where predators just kill all the prey. And then go extinct themselves. And I think that's even a problem that occurs frequently, even like in the lab. Like if you have a small, simple lab setup test, where there aren't a lot of good places for prey to sort of hide and get into places where predators can't get them, you often will tend to see that result happening, whereas what you want to have in the game and what you see in nature is more of a sinusoidal sort of curve where as the prey population drops, the predator population drops, and then and as the predator population drops, the prey population rises, and sort of following that, the predator population rises, so they kind of follow each other in this kind of nice wave format. So sorry, I think that was kind of a rambling answer.
If anyone is wondering how difficult a game like this is to balance, nature had eons. Tom has got just a few short years.
Yeah. So, and what I did here with these parts is called mirroring in the game, and that's sort of an important concept for a couple reasons. And it's because, so not only do the creatures have bodies, they also have brains. So I just made one part, and then I mirrored it over here. I mirrored it onto the right side, and then I made a copy and mirrored that one too. And so there are two sort of important things about that. One is that, so in addition to having bodies, creatures also have brains. And their brains are physically located. So their brains aren't sort of like in the ether. You know, their brains are actually located in individual body parts. They have a nervous system that spreads throughout them. And one thing that allows them to do is to have sort of nervous system controls for a body part in that body part. And so basically what that means is that when these creatures learn, so for example, we have this creature who is trying to swim by paddling his neck left and right. And so we have a few that are doing that, and this one seems to be doing it with his tail. And so I'm curious if eventually we'll find one over here has kind of managed to move some of his flippers a little bit, but also seems a little derpy, I guess you would say.
Trying to evolve the propeller.
Yeah. And that was another interesting sort of bug system, actually. When I first worked on the game, creatures would always evolve to be propellers. No matter what happened, they would always evolve to rotate like this all the time, no matter what. And what it turns out is because the game is very physically based, most game physics engines don't conserve angular momentum, which means that you can kind of get free rotation without having to, pay for it energy-wise.
So artifacts of the game engine's physics are appearing in the evolutionary stages.
Exactly, yeah. And so what was essentially happening is all the creatures were evolving to be little perpetual motion machines. Because that was possible. And if we lived in a universe, if like we ourselves lived in a universe where perpetual motion was possible, I actually would expect to see a bunch of animals that exploit that, just like these creatures did, when that was something that you could exploit.
Yeah, fascinating. I hadn't thought of that before. Absolutely, yeah. They're going to find ways to exploit just the little janky quirks of a physics engine. Of course they are.
Yeah. And so one of the advantages with, I didn't want to press that button. I wanted to press this one. So one of the advantages with mirroring is, like I was saying, so each creature, the creatures sort of move like us. When they swim, they don't just play like a swimming animation. They actually like physically contract muscles at joints, and that moves their body parts, and the body parts move against the water, and the water flows around them and pushes back. And sort of if you coordinate that all very well, then you can swim. And so basically mirroring the body parts allows for them to also mirror the nervous system that's in those body parts that control those. So essentially they can, which helps them to coordinate, and it also means that future mutations, like if it adds like a little like spike at the end of one of the body parts to like attack or something, it can get that on all four body parts, not just on one. And so the basic structure of these is, you can see down here, he has a single eye neuron that feeds up into this central section of these are sort of just functions. These are basically just generic functions, and those eventually pass data itself up to the muscles. It's hard to, like, even if I look at this, I don't really know what's happening because it's such a mess, just like you wouldn't know what's happening in a real brain if you could see it. But I sort of like to know that it's there. And it's useful every once in a while for debugging if you're really willing to sit down and try to figure out what all of these things mean.
It's actually visually very cool to see, like, to see these different notes imitating like signals beaming around neural networks, and it's a rather unique thing. I don't think I've ever seen anything similar to this kind of evolution process and the neural network, like the ecosystem, and it feels like a really unique process for a game, for a creature simulation game. And what inspired you to make a game with evolution as like the core aspect?
So it was inspired by research, actually, by research that was done by a guy named Carl Sims back in the 90s. So he was doing this on supercomputers back then. He made a video for SIGGRAPH, which is like the big sort of graphics conference in computer science. And he made this great video of these creatures that he made. He was running it on MIT at a supercomputer like overnight, so it wasn't even remotely close. Even with a supercomputer, it wasn't running in real time. It's only because now it's been decades since then that you can run this on a desktop. But I figured since we've reached that point, it's sort of unfortunate that we don't have a game like that. There were, I think maybe some people thought that Spore was going to be that kind of game, but then it turned out not to be really in the end. And so I thought it would be interesting to see a real evolution simulation game and how that turns out.
And yeah, that sounds... I didn't realize there's actually an attempt to simulate life form that long of that many years ago, actually.
Yeah, it was fascinating, and it was very much like out of nowhere. Like nobody had seen anything like that before, and it feels very far ahead of its time. He wrote a couple papers where he sort of laid out in very high-level terms how he did it, like the basic concepts of how the neural networks work and how the creatures are sort of designed and things like that. And he had a couple different variations on it. So he taught them to swim. He taught a few creatures to kind of crawl around a little bit. And then he also had them sort of play a game where they try to get control of a ball, basically. They try to get a ball so that it's in their territory. They're sort of playing, I guess, like tug of war or something like that. And that sort of inspired the combat system of the game, like his tug of war battles were the inspiration for Ecosystem's physics-based combat.
And now everyone can build an entire world under the sea, all on their own.
Yeah, I think. It's what sort of I imagined doing when I first saw that video actually decades ago, and I think it's great that it's actually like computationally possible to do now.
It's actually really amazing to have such a great platform for everyone to just, if they want to, just simulate life at the palm of their hand. Especially, you also have a whole Steam Workshop online library available in the game, and we've seen a lot of creations by the community over the years, terrain, creatures, and honestly, and when I was making the trailer, that was really helpful. Getting more variety of like creatures for like the terrain to just add more scenes to the visuals. Our community really got some amazing creations out there. I'm not quite sure if you can access the online library on your build right now, but
I think I might be able to. I think I should be able to pop up a few things. So so that's here. There's an online library. Wait, hold on a sec.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Sorry.
No worries. Well, do you have any relatively do you have any have you ran into any terrain or creatures that leaves a very strong impression in your mind? Like, have you seen any amazing creations of any particular player, or any creatures that looks like a rather bizarre but stunning, out-of-the-world creation that it feels more memorable?
Yeah, I think there were a handful. One thing that I always really liked was, Stobbs, who is our community scientist and serves as kind of a liaison in a lot of ways between us and everybody else that plays the game. He figured out a way to sort of glitch the camera up above the waterline and then build land and then spawn creatures up on land, and basically then got evolved creatures to actually walk. And whenever I would tell anybody about this game, they always said, "Well, when you've won the game when you evolve a creature that, like the first fish, crawls out of the ocean and walks onto the beach." And so I was very impressed that he actually really managed to do that. And a lot of people even play it that way. And I've always tried to. I've left that bug as it is, so that you always can, if you want to, slide the camera up above the waterline, spawn creatures up above, and see how they if you can make them walk.
Never
it's
remove
harder.
the
It's a
fun
lot
bugs.
harder.
Never remove the fun stuff.
Yeah.
It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah, exactly.
It is now.
Oh,
So that always.
Yes. Yes. Please continue.
That always stood out to me. I always thought that was really fascinating because they've almost sort of like figured out their own way to play the game. And some other things that always stood out. I think I mentioned the environments that would have fit in a FromSoft game, with giant skulls and a rib cage. Once you pan out far enough, you realize that your creatures are swimming through a giant rib cage. And aside from that, also things like there was a period where people were making humans, sort of cursed human fishes.
Yeah, kinda making humans.
kind of making humans. There was Liam's cat, which I actually thought was remarkably cat-like for a game that was not at all meant to support that.
Yeah, I saw that. That was quite cursed, honestly.
Yeah. And there was also a great one called Oasis Caves that I know that this is a train, not a fish, but that built a whole cave system, and the creatures do have AI advanced enough that they can pass through cave systems and go find mushrooms that are in there. They won't get necessarily stuck. I mean, they might get stuck every once in a while, but generally they are capable of getting into and out of caves. And just it was just very, I thought, aesthetic. It looked like something that you'd see in like a fantasy novel or something like that.
Oh, Sir Pineapple the Wise in the chat mentioned a green fish they saw swim by. Looks like a dinoflagellate. I assume it's the green fish with like oh, this one has a lot of limbs. The one we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
I assume they're talking about that one, and Dinoman9877 has just mentioned how cleanly these green ray animals are swimming. Do you mind sharing more about how these creatures learn to swim? Because if I remember, once the moment they're spawned, they're not that great in swimming, but over time they're getting better.
Yeah, so and we saw that a little bit with the plesiosaurs when we spawned them, right? Where like some of them were kind of like randomly moving their necks around, and some of them were moving their flippers, but kind of not in the ideal way that you would if you were trying to swim. And so basically, when creatures are spawned, they have totally random brains and totally random bodies. If you make the body in the editor, then that body is fixed, and only their brains are random. But so like basically, what can happen is you have totally random brains and totally random bodies, and in that initial phase, when they're sort of learning to swim, what will happen is they're essentially scored. So in this sort of lore of the game, they're eating plankton that's in the water, and in the sort of mechanics behind it, they're basically scored on how good they are at swimming, and this score eventually turns into how many children they're allowed to have. And so, like we have this DNA that sort of codifies everything about a creature, we also have the ability to mutate it and also to mate it. So the creatures that survive, that do the best, they will have children, and they have more children if they manage to do better. And since we also have this method for mutation, that also means that some of their children will not only have their advantages, but might also have a new mutation. And so with that, each generation down the line, you sort of proceed, and eventually you get something that really can swim. The fluid mechanics itself are not extremely complicated because there's so many fish. So it's a simple model that's mostly based on just drag based on the drag calculations, mostly based on like what the creature's the surface area as it moves through the water, how fast it's moving, and so that but it is enough to get so you don't have like sort of complicated vortices that you might see in real life swimming. But then of course I could only have one fish probably running at a time. But with the sort of simpler drags-based system, you still do get fish that can actually swim, and frequently they even swim they eventually get to the point where they can swim really well. And it's really shocking. Sometimes if you can leave the game, people leave the game running for all night and come back and look and see what's been there. And you get creatures that are suddenly way faster. Occasionally, especially if you sort of tweak parameters, you can get fish that are really like a tuna, basically just built for speed. Or like we see these creatures actually have spikes all over them. So these creatures are stronger against the predators. These are foragers here, I believe. Yes, and the spikes should serve as protection against predators. So one thing I think we didn't mention, or that we didn't go into too much detail, is also there are types of venom. And so a predator that goes after this species may end up actually getting a spike, and could end up, depending on the kind of venom that the creature has, could end up being blinded or being weakened or exhausted suddenly. And so that sort of adds a whole different layer of complexity to the combat. And we can actually see a little bit of combat here. There's not much time left, but it looks like, not much time before this creature it looks like he's on his last leg, but we can see this plesiosaur trying to slowly reach over and wipe out this forager. But it managed to get a bite off on him. We can see here he got a little -1, and they're kind of circling around. So the creatures often have thick skulls, so they often want to go after each other on soft underbellies. So when they do combat, it often feels like sort of planes that are in a dogfight sometimes, where they, instead of just going head on at each other, they will sometimes crack heads every once in a while, but oftentimes they sort of try to dodge and swoop under and get at a soft underbelly or something like that.
Correctly, the spikes is also one of the ways that preys can fight back against their predators. Oh, we are seeing one of the green fish running away a bit from their predators. And the venoms also apply different status effects to if they are in fact on the animal. Like for example, they have spikes with venoms. They should be able to apply some effects onto whatever hit the spikes, right?
And then in turn, eventually, the things that hit the spikes can evolve resistances to those even specific types of poison. So there's not like a generic poison resistance trait, but there are poison resistant traits for every individual type of poison. And also, just like real poison, the bigger the creature, the more venom it needs to actually have an effect. So a big creature like these plesiosaurs might be able to take 1 spike, or even 2. It may take 3 spikes before, or very potent venom, in order to actually have an effect on something giant like this that's swimming around.
Just some news hot off the press. The game has now transitioned to version 1.0. And it is
great.
now up on Steam at a 30% launch discount. The official launch is still at 6, so that's what it'll say when we end this stream in a few minutes' time. So don't get confused there, but the game is now in 1.0 with the launch discount. Go get it if you've been waiting.
That's great news.
Finally, we are in 1.0.
Yeah, after many years. I think it's been 4 years of early access. That actually reminds me of one of the very first updates, which I think I never even got to show, was all of these data. So this is sort of another way that you can categorize all the information in the game. So we have graphs here of all the different animal populations, also of all the different plant populations as they battle amongst each other. And then for any given species, we can sort of zoom in and actually see a phylogenetic tree of it. So this basically is when we spawned it, the very first creature. And then you can actually not only see traits of its population, like causes of death, what they like to eat, their birth rates, things like that, but we can even sort of zoom in and actually see creatures, which ones actually had the most success, and you get a little photo for the ones that were exceptionally successful. These were the plesiosaurs that we made earlier, so the photos often just seem to have their necks captured. But we can sort of see here that when we had, for example, this one, Pat, every creature has a name, had a change to its neuron weight, and that sort of allowed it to be more successful than usual, and it got to have 3 children instead of 1 or 0. And so you can really actually trace out evolution down to an individual level if you want to while you're playing the game.
Looks like this, plesiosaur? I think that's how it's called, yes. Is actually definitely branching out with quite a family tree. And looks like the new species is indeed thriving in the ocean. Of course, we'd love to see more of it evolving in the future, but we are, I think we are approaching the end of the stream. Yeah, thank you, Tom, for showing us the wonderful submarine world of ecosystem. But yeah. Is there any more questions in the chat? And do you still have anything else that you want to cover before we go? Actually,
I'm just gonna. Sorry, I'm gonna jump scare people with my face. I do apologise if anyone. Is, but yeah, Tom, do you want to go back to your cam view?
Sure.
Yeah, just so that for the wind down, we're all of us on the screen at the same time again. Okay,
yeah, sounds good.
Carry on, Heyman.
Yeah, not much to carry on actually. Yeah, I've been playing Ecosystem for quite a while, partly because of making content for the social media as well, and yeah, really impressed by all the complex evolution process of the game, and I'm just really glad to see it out finally in 1.0 as well in its full form. And yeah, congratulations, Tom, for
congrats
for finally getting
remarkable achievement.
Out
yeah, thank you.
Full game. And
thank you.
Looking forward to just seeing what the world does with it now.
Yeah, me too. And all right, thank you both for hosting this.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Tom, for this talk. Right, so we'll go on Steam now. Ecosystem on Steam, 30% off. Now launched into 1.0 after quite a long time in early access, as this is not an easy kind of project to produce, as you can imagine. So we're gonna end the stream now, and we'll go and do our marketing jobs, because no rest for the wicked, as they say. We have a stretch to go yet. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Go and play Ecosystem, create some wonderful things, and share them with us. We'd love to see them. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.